you need to crack it open. And you need to be careful because you know, you can bounce off it. But you know, when you're harvesting your winter squash, you know it's mature. They say, you know, once the vines have died and the skin is hard, to let it mature another couple weeks. So if you've had an acorn squash and it's been sitting on your shelf another couple weeks, you know, when you open that up to cook it, those seeds, just because you put a tag around it doesn't mean that you can't eat the fruit if it's if it's appropriate to eat. So in this case, it would be great. So, you know, you eke out the seeds. But see, the thing is there's the there's the flesh there too. We've all dealt with that. So again, so you can also put this kind of thing out on a plate and send a fan over it. Don't put it on a piece of paper. You're gonna wish you didn't. So depending on how large scale you're doing and the size of the seed, you can get, if I were doing just a squash, I would use this little sieve here and wash away the stuff. If I'm doing a lot, I'm going to get a bucket. I've seen like a 5-gallon bucket like this with the bottom cut out and hardware cloth. Now, hardware cloth is that little square meshy screen. Comes in different sizes. And you could have, if you were on this on large different scale, you know, every one of these cucurbit seeds is a different size. Now you can see this is not like a big pumpkin seed. So if I were doing this, I would have a little 3/16 hardware cloth. But if I were doing big pumpkin seeds, I have another bucket that has 1/2-inch hardware cloth. And you can take a hose nozzle and run all this stuff off, because that's going to catch and the seeds will go through. Because what you want, and we've all done this, when you want to bake the seeds to eat them, you know, clean them up, what you just want to get, I'm doing this the hard laborious way, what you want is just the seed without the flesh. I always throw out the floaters because that means there's air and not an oily seed in there. And as you can see, one squash, I only just reached in and grabbed a little bit. One squash is going to produce a lot of seeds, and you don't want one squash. If you're just doing seed saving, don't let that stop you. I'm not a rule follower in that way. I encourage you to always just test something out. But if you wanted to really get into it, make sure you have a 6 squashes. And you know, you're going to have a whole bunch of seed. You can pick, you know, reach and grab even a portion of that. You say, oh, I don't want to have all that, but I'm gonna put the rest in the oven and nibble on it tonight. But I'm gonna make sure I save out what I want to save for seed for me and maybe to share, or maybe for 3 years, because maybe next year you won't grow this variety, or maybe next year it's going to be a crop failure. You know, because one of the things I've noticed is that sometimes there's a good squash year, sometimes not. And sometimes the blooming of the acorn squash came at a different time than the Hubbard, and the conditions, the environment changed, and all the, you know, the Hubbard just didn't do it. But you end up with 90 acorn squash, and you go, wow. And then, but the next year it'd be just the opposite. So any of the cucurbit seeds, you see they're really thick. They got that little kind of a sunflowery nut on the inside, and that takes a while to dry. These, hours. It doesn't take very long for these to dry. If it's taking longer than that, I would start worrying that I don't have airflow. You want them to dry quickly. These just don't dry as quickly. They take a while, but they're not going to sprout on you unless you have them in water or such. But you don't need to ferment these. You just need to clean them up and then dry them. So, any other questions? little sample put out on the table of corn that dry, and then you get the seeds dry. It's interesting you mentioned sunflower, because I was just reading about that in Buffalo Bird Woman. Because one of the things I noticed is she talks about saving the squash and selecting the corn and the different kinds of corn, but they don't actually isolate. They weren't isolating their corn, but they did recognize that there were different varieties. And there's a picture in here of her cutting sunflowers, and I noticed that they didn't talk about variety purity. And I don't know enough about sunflowers. Sunflowers are really very new in my experience. I haven't grown them, and here they're all over the place, and I don't know who mixes with whom, and but they were an incredibly important food in the native culture. There's talk about the three sisters, beans, corn, squash, but she also talks about in here sunflower and tobacco. And sunflower was, I believe, their main oil source. Because fat's much more available now, but fat was an important food item. Fat and salt in more historical times, they were harder to come by. So. But of course, you do wait for them to be fully dry and pop out. The picture in here in Buffalo Bird Woman's garden, she has a basket that she has in front of her, and she's clipping or cutting the sunflowers into a container. And then they take them to an area where, as a group, they were processing the corn or processing the sunflowers. It was one of their communal kind of activities. The way I have started in terms of the gene purity has been to order from a catalog that I believe has been good. The Garden City Seeds was an old one. They actually aren't in existence anymore. They became Irish Eyes, and I don't know what they are now. And now I've got a lot from Seed Savers Exchange. I became a member, and it's just part of what I've done. So I ordered many varieties from them. So that has been sort of my start. Or through the networking that goes with something like the Seed Savers Exchange. Keep an eye out. Earlier this year, Backyard Abundance, which is a local nonprofit organization that is really spreading the word of permaculture philosophy and urban permaculture. There was a seed exchange. They've been doing it. There was environmental film that was on. There's like cooperative groups. There was an environmental film, and Backyard Abundance held a seed saving exchange gathering. So if you keep an eye on backyardabundance.org, or get on their mailing list, you'll find out when that is. So if you want to gather a few seeds that locals have saved through this last year or years before, that would be an opportunity for you to show up. And it's about generosity, of sharing the abundance of what you have, what you've done, and perhaps next year it would be you coming to that and sharing. It's quite rewarding, actually. I told my story about the beet because, to me, I was not thinking about genetic purity. I went to the co-op because I knew, it said organic, so that, generally it's not for certain, and it didn't say Detroit dark red on there, but what I wanted was, what I was looking for was a beet that I thought would go to seed so I could practice the saving of seed. Not necessarily the carrying of a seed line. I wanted to handle the seed. And I would, next year actually, I have beets here that I know what they are, and I will carry those forward. But I was wanting to practice something new this year, so that's how I think